Remember, examine, collect, treat. Call your county agent and help stop screwworms.
Not all comebacks are good, and this is one the US desperately wanted to avoid. Now, say it with me, Cochleomia hominivorax. That's Latin for man-eater, and now better known as the New World Screwworm. Well, this nasty parasite has made its way back onto US soil. It's not really a worm, it's a fly larva that burrows into open wounds, feeding on the flesh of living animals like cattle.
The bad news is we do have to deal with this thing, and it's big, and it's going to be a very costly enterprise. There's really no way around that.
That's Professor Derrell Peel, Extension Livestock Marketing Specialist in the Department of Agricultural Economics at Oklahoma State University. In other words, he tracks the US beef industry, a billion-dollar sector facing a potentially billion-dollar problem. Because this is a pest that the US once defeated. For decades, coordinated efforts pushed the screwworm all the way back to a containment zone past the Darien Gap, which is Panama's border region with Colombia. But fast forward, the parasite resurfaces in Mexico in 2024, spreads rapidly, and now confirmed cases in Texas and New Mexico. Just a handful, but enough to trigger alarm. US authorities are preparing an all-out assault. But first, why is the screwworm back?
Yeah, that's a great question, because it's been a never-ending battle. Even though we eradicated New World Screwworm from the U.S. in the 1960s, we worked with Mexico later to push it out of Mexico down through Central America to the containment zone that's been in place now for many years in Panama. But that's a narrow area. The resources there were scaled according to, kind of the way the world was, I guess, at that point in time, using the sterile flies. Of course, that's the primary mechanism for providing a barrier for these things.
Just quickly, Professor Peel is talking about one of the key ways to fight the screwworm, which is dropping sterile male flies that breed with females to stop reproduction. The US has been doing that in South Texas since February. But more on that later. Let's hear more about why the screwworm is back.
And what evolved over time was changes in cattle markets a little bit. There was more demand for cattle in Central America. Combine that with a combination of both legal and some illegal movement of cattle in areas that had previously not seen cattle production or cattle movement. And so the New World Screwworm fly was able to sort of get past the barrier about 2022, I think it was, started, and began to work its way north through Central America. It got into Mexico in late 2024. And, again, with the inability, because of the current level of resources, to contain it at that point, it spread across much of Mexico and now has reached the U.S.
So the writing may have been on the wall for a while. Professor Peel mentions resources, and that's key. I asked him about the Trump administration's recent cuts to funding for monitoring and containing the parasite.
Well, resources have tightened up everywhere, so it certainly undoubtedly has some impacts. But in terms of the New World Screwworm, again, previously used facilities that were not in use at the time had been decommissioned in the U.S. and in Mexico. And so, now that this has happened, those resources are being brought back online, and so they will be available at some point. But right now, there's a limitation on resources available, particularly with respect to the sterile fly production that's needed.
Let's talk a little bit about the kind of devastation the screwworm can cause. If left untreated, the impact can be severe, both for animals and for the farmers who care for them.
It feeds on living tissue, and so it's particularly devastating when this fly is in the area. It will, attack an animal through any sort of wound or any sort of body opening, and lay eggs, and these then begin to feed on the animal. So Left untreated, it's absolutely horrific what it does to the animals. It literally eats them from the inside out, and it does just incredible damage. If found, it's relatively easy to treat, but it's also very persistent once that fly is in the area. Basically, animals have to be checked daily to look for new infestations on animals and treat them. And so it's extremely labor intensive and very costly for monitoring and for management of this thing once it gets into an area. As long as the fly is in the area, it will be an ongoing cost to the producer because you can't just find it once and eliminate it from the animal. You have to check animals continuously and monitor for new infestation. So that's why the broader public effort to contain it and control it is so important because otherwise it really is a never-ending cost for the producer to continue to monitor and check those animals. And of course, if not found in time, those animals will suffer damage and potentially losses as a result of the fly. So it's a huge management challenge, and it has those ongoing costs for both the producer as well as the public sector in terms of trying to contain it.
So, what's the situation in the US as it stands right now?
Well, right now we have a handful of cases. The latest update I've seen from USDA is that we've had a total of 7 cases. That's a very small number, but they're also spread out. So it indicates that we probably have more spread of this thing at this point in time. So it remains to be seen. It's very much a moving target right now on just how big of an issue this is going to become in terms of the region that will be impacted. So there's, obviously a lot of efforts being made right now for that broader monitoring by individuals on the ground using fly traps and other things to try to determine where this thing is and try to get an effective barrier around it. The primary challenge that the U.S. faces now broadly is simply the limitation again of the sterile fly availability. We simply don't have enough production of those right now to be able to create an effective barrier in all the areas where it's needed.
There's that mention of sterile flies again. This is the US government's program to breed sterile male flies and drop swarms of them from planes to disrupt reproduction. It's the method that kept the screwworm contained in Panama for decades. But right now, there's a shortage, though efforts are underway to ramp up production.
It's a very effective technique to work to contain it and help eradicate it. It's been a problem really ever since it got into Mexico because we've worked jointly with Mexico for all these years. And so the limitations on availability of sterile flies has been part of the problem and the concerns with the spread of it through Mexico and now into the U.S.
Well, insects don't care about borders. So is this a fight the US can win on its own? How is cooperation with Mexico?
There is cooperation. There's certainly a joint interest in controlling this. I think everybody on both sides understands that we're going to be better off if we are able to work together to control and eradicate this thing. And ultimately, it's right now it's in the U.S. We're trying to contain it here. But once that happens, it will be important to continue that process to help Mexico get control of it. Otherwise, again, it just never really goes away. So, the cooperation is there. You can always make arguments about whether it's exactly how you would like it to be.
What this highlights is just how difficult this pest is to stop and the potential impact on the US cattle industry. So far, the screwworm hasn't significantly affected beef prices, which are already high due to a smaller cattle herd. But if you live in the US, how concerned should you be, both for your health and for your wallet?
So I think that is something that's there, and it's one of the reasons why we're trying to distinguish sort of the broader market impacts from the health and the disease, or not disease, but the pest management impacts of this outbreak. And so, initially when you hear something like this, I think there's a natural concern that pops up that this might cause additional reductions in beef production. It's simply not expected to do that. So that's something that you should be taken care of fairly quickly. I think from my understanding at this point, there's no widespread panic or anything. This thing can affect humans, but again, it's a pest. So as long as it's something that is a physical process when this pest gets into a wound on a person. In fact, there was a case several months ago of someone who had been in Mexico, came back to the U.S. and actually had an infestation that was treated and with no further consequences. So I don't at this point see that there's a lot of broad-based consumer or public concern about this, either from a health standpoint and certainly not from a food standpoint.
Despite all that, the screwworm's return brings real uncertainty and serious challenges. What happens now?
Well, the good news was the fact that we don't expect market impacts. The bad news is we do have to deal with this thing, and it's big, and it's going to be a very costly enterprise. There's really no way around that. So I think the obviously the efforts it takes now to try to get some containment in place and stop the spread of it in the U.S. initially, and then again beyond that. And so, we're kind of back in that mode again, and that's going to be a long process, I expect, a lengthy process at any rate. And so we do that again, and then, the best outcome here is that we get it back to what we had before, and then continue the process of containing it at a place where it's relatively easy to contain.
So, some real lessons there. Past success only goes so far against a threat like this, what Professor Peel called a never-ending battle that requires constant resources and cooperation. How concerned are you about the spread of the New World Screwworm? Let us know in the comments. We've also got more on this on our channel. I'm Jared Reid in Berlin. Thank you to Professor Derrell Peel and my producers Till Boller, Aaron Tilton, Isabella Nabodny and Yvonne Cheshire. Take care.